All right, next question. And I'm actually going to skip one, and I'll get back to it here later. Secretary Glickman, you recently wrote an article for The Hill, and it was titled Expanding Food Production in a Carbon-Constrained Future, where you said agriculture will be challenged to produce more while emitting fewer greenhouse gases. MIT released a study last week that finds if the U.S. were to impose a tax on carbon emissions, that effort could result in $1.5 trillion coming to the Treasury. Is the situation that bad? And does anyone believe Congress has the stomach to pass such a measure?
I'm not for a carbon tax, but I do think that we're kind of got our hat over our face if we don't think that we're in an extremely volatile weather environment. And who knows what it's caused, whether it's acts of God or acts of human beings. And farmers are going to have a tougher and tougher time coping with this. And I think my biggest point is that producing enough food to feed 9.5 billion people over the next 30 years will require farmers to be helped to adapt to that kind of situation in order to continue to make a living. And most farmers, by the way, recognize that they have to engage in new and modern techniques, whether it's no-till or other types of practices, to help them cope in the world that they're in. So I'm not for a tax. I am for, however, the recognition that the next 20 or 30 years may find more and more years like this one every single year. Imagine that. And if that's the case, then we need to make sure that we can cope with that. We have the research tools available to help farmers. And I want to go back to the research side of the picture, is that the need to develop ways to develop drought-resistant crops and to constrain the use of water are really big high priorities. Agriculture uses 73% of the fresh water in the world. All the rest of the water is used for human consumption and manufacturing. And so if we're in a period of drought, the stresses on the ability to use the quantities of water we're doing now is going to be significant. And we got to figure out how to do that, which means we need to figure out whether there are ways to grow better and more drought-resistant crops, and there are ways to irrigate in a more efficient way. And, you know, it's just going to kind of be the way of the world, not only here, but around the rest of the world. And I don't think this is anything particularly revolutionary. I think it just is taking into account the economic and weather conditions that farmers are facing. The other thing is, even with the best crop insurance in the world, you're dependent upon Congress appropriating the dollars to provide the subsidies for the crop insurance and do all that kind of stuff. Who knows what we're going to be able to do in a budget-constrained environment in the future? And so the real decision is going to be on the part of our land-grant schools, our educational institutions, our research institutions, and the private sector in developing a system of agriculture that allows farmers to keep and compete in that kind of environment. And I think that if we don't recognize that, and that's without going down, I think, a road of impractical regulatory conclusions, which some may find attractive. I think the real answers lie on the research side of the picture. And we're beginning to make some progress on that, as most of you know, but it's still not perfect yet. And the livestock industry is particularly threatened by this because they're affected by price, and they're also, to date, have not had any kind of good risk management system that allows them to help themselves during these tough times.
I don't know what point in the game this is, but up in Manhattan, the ever-optimistic and fighting Wildcats 13, Miami 0. Oh, 14, sorry. Yeah, we're doubling down. That's the Ryan budget score there. That's what they're doing. Well, okay, nobody in the Congress is going to turn their back on renewables, wind, solar, et cetera, biomass, all of that. It's going forward, although it's a more difficult environment now. I wish we could do it that would be more market-oriented as opposed to mandates and regs and, quite frankly, picking and choosing in Washington as to what's the best investment that could be made. Read Solandra and a 100 other examples. I don't think we should be doing that, and I think that we ought to go forward with as much as we can on the renewable side, but folks, somewhere between 3 and 5% over the next decade or two of energy is going to come from renewables. The rest of it, yes, oil, gas, coal, others as well. And I don't think we should be in the business of actually declaring war on fossil fuels at this particular time. I think that there are different ways to do this. I think a classic example is the clean coal energy plant out at Holcomb. That's not going to get built with all the litigation and everything else. I don't think you can rule anything out, and I'm for all the above, but I detect in this administration a penchant for opposed to oil and gas, read the Keystone Pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to get into all that, but that's really wrong-headed. So I agree with Dan, and we ought to do everything we can for research, more especially in behalf of precision agriculture. That's where the future lies if we're going to